Okay, so good afternoon and evening to some who in Europe now. And thank you, dear friends, for joining us for this presentation of the extraordinary project, Yiddishland Pavilion, that puts itself on the map of the 59th Venice Biennale in dialogue with some of the national pavilions. My name is Regina Hidekel. I'm director of RACC, and I'm very pleased that Maria Veits will talk about this intriguing project. And I'm happy that here is also Evgeny Fix, co-curator, who will probably take part in the discussion at the end. This project, in addition to the importance as a contribution to contemporary art and interdisciplinary cultural studies, is very personal for each of us and almost family related. I remember a conversation with Gerson Jacobson in the late 90s, founder, editor, and publisher of Der Allgemeiner Journal, one of the largest Yiddish weekly newspapers in North America. I asked him why he was publishing a newspaper for such a small audience. And he said that it was a duty to those who disappeared in Holocaust, who spoke this language. I understood him very well because my maternal grandparents shared this fate. I remember walking with my mother around the small town in Bukovina, and my mother told me that Jews lived on this street. They had business on the first floor and lived on the floor above. Of course, at that time, there were no Jews. And this was probably my first acquaintance with the urban environment when the Jews lived and completely disappeared. And the places were repopulated by others. This memory of my mother and departed Jewish world has merged into one of my soul and memory, and especially resonates with me when I find myself in the former Jewish shtetls in Belarus, or in the Jewish quarter of Vilna, or in Poland, in total absence of Jews. What to do with this? And Yiddishland is an attempt to activate Yiddish and the diasporic Jewish discourse in contemporary artistic practice and answer somehow on this question. We have been living in the diaspora since the time of Joseph in Egypt. This presentation is part of our Diaspora Festival, a festival of films and projects created exclusively by expatriates artists outside the metropolis. But what is the metropolis for us today? Soviet republics where we were born and our ancestors spoke Yiddish, or modern time Israel, where Hebrew was revived. This is also a question. And the concept of Yiddishland project illuminates the strategy that a widely dispersed people can use to maintain its identity while lacking a discrete territory. It's no coincidence that the Yiddish vision is characterized by utopian writing and architecture, which compensates the lack of discrete territory by imagining new urban forms and new relations with society, which in Mandelstam's words determines the place of man in the universe against flourishing and perishing cities. For example, exploring the legacy of the futuristic cities of Lazar Hidekel, we see new urban structures on the scale of nature based on horizontality, equality, and healthy environment. It's a new world. I'm curious to attend to more presentation of Yiddish architecture by the same people, but I'm extremely interested to hear from Maria Veits about the Yiddishland, how this timely project came about and how it was implemented in multidisciplinary solutions. Just a few words about Maria Veits. She is an independent curator and researcher. In her curatorial projects, Maria traces the ways of how manipulating information and rewriting history can be integrated in the process of nation building through the system of education, media, architecture, and other social institutions and forms of statehood. Maria is co-founder of Talk, a female curatorial collective and nomadic platform based on the past few years. She curated Of the Space, Counter-Narrating the Cosmos exhibition in Cologne, and Get Real, Voicing the Silence and Intensive Places, the main exhibition of the Tallinn Photomonths Biennale. So Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Regina. Thank you for this wonderful presentation and for the invitation. I'm very, very honored to be here tonight with you and talk about the Yiddishland Pavilion. It was very touching how you started the introduction of the project, and that you also touched upon your own memories about certain places and spaces. And I just wanted briefly to say that the next event of the Yiddishland Pavilion is tomorrow, and it's an online event about Jewish and Yiddish architecture and the imprint of Yiddish through architecture in different European cities. I'll also make this announcement later in the end of my presentation, but I just wanted to say that it's nice that you know, the theme of architecture is very much present in the discussion that we're doing as a part of Yiddishland Pavilion. So what is Yiddishland Pavilion, and how did it come about? This project that Yevgeny Fix and myself have been plotting for, I think, about 3 years by now. We first started discussing it in Moscow, actually, when I was curating Yevgeny's solo exhibition, Yiddish Cosmos, which was also, I think, a fantastic project. It was also shown in New York, and it was traveling in Moscow, and later I showed it also in Israel. And the project touches upon non-obvious, underrepresented, often hidden bits of Yiddish history, and it tells us through the history of Russian and Soviet cosmism and history of exploring cosmos. So I think that was a very interesting way at looking at the Soviet history, the Soviet Jewish histories through the prism of cosmos and space exploration. And when we were installing the show, we started the conversation about Venice, because that was also the year of Venice Biennale, the 58th Venice Biennale. And Jen shared with me the idea of Yiddishland Pavilion, of a Yiddish pavilion, of Jewish pavilion at the Venice Biennale, about an alternative pavilion that would be representative for, you know, Jewish artists, Yiddish artists, contemporary Yiddish art, that would be the territory of the art that probably is sort of not marginalized, but maybe is not that widely presented in the main contemporary artistic discourse in the art world. I love this idea. I think it was very beautiful. It was very timely. It was, and still is. We started discussing this project together and thinking how potentially Yiddishland Pavilion could appear at the Biennale. And you know, we all know that the Biennale is very much of a project that how can I make it larger? a project that is very political. You know, in the very core of the Biennale, there's this structure of national division, of national representation, of very strict, you know, political borders that are, you know, still very present in the world, and hence at the Biennale. This is a very much of a divided territory, of course, regulated territory, the world in itself, in a way that, you know, lives according to its own rules, and entering this world as a stranger, maybe as an independent curator, as an artist, without you know, an institution in the back, will be very difficult. At the same time, we all know that the Biennale is also, you know, reflecting and responding to all the processes that are happening globally, and I think it's a good thing. And we've seen lots of you know, processes and the changes and shifts that were happening to the world reflected in the policy and politics of the Biennale. For instance, this year, and I think many of you have seen this photograph, you know, the pavilion of Russia was closed. Russian curators and Lithuanian invited curator, Russian artists and the Lithuanian invited curator who was supposed to curate the pavilion, they all withdrew from working and representing Russia as only the war broke. And Russian pavilion stood and is standing closed for the whole duration of the Biennale. It has also become very guarded because I think the Biennale was afraid of potential vandalism and potential performances and actions that would, you know, maybe damage the building. Russian artist, Berlin-based now, Vadim Zakharov, was at the Biennale, and he stood. There was a poster where he was denouncing the war and condemning the war and expressing his own attitude towards the Russian invasion in Ukraine. So, you know, the Biennale is also always a political ground, place for, I think, reflecting the relationship between countries and between societies. Of course, there was, you know, a lot of attention was dedicated to Ukraine this year. Finally, Ukraine got a permanent space at the Biennale, which is so far is a quite small room at the Arsenale, but it's already a place that Ukraine will have, I hope for good, a pavilion that will be at the premises of the Biennale and will never leave the Biennale. And another thing that was also reflecting, I think, the attitude of the global community to, you know, to the war, and a gesture of expressing solidarity with Ukraine was a gesture and a project initiated by Cecilia Alemane, curator of the main pavilion, who initiated the sculpture made of sandbags at the very center of Giardini, and this was kind of, you know, a reference to the way how Ukrainians are covering monuments in order to protect them from the Russian military in Ukrainian cities. So just, you know, to kind of remind you all, I'm sure you're aware of that, but just to remind you of, you know, how the Biennale works, how it responds to immediate political processes and phenomena and conflicts, and how much divided it is still. This is just giving, you know, a background of how also difficult it is to penetrate this very much of a regulated and divided sort of ground and field. So the idea of Yiddishland Pavilion was and is still to try to understand how Yiddishland can be presented at the Biennale, and how it can be a part, hopefully an ongoing part, an always present part of the Venice Biennale, and serve as a platform for contemporary Yiddish and Jewish artists who maybe otherwise would not have maybe a space or platform for such wide representation, and also could, create and make a platform for Jewish voices and Yiddish voices to be enhanced, to be heard, and also to reach out to wider audiences. So clearly, the map of the Venice Biennale is to a large extent a European map, and the Biennale would start as a Biennale of European countries, and each of them would have a national pavilion there. But of course, we also understand that this map is very much related to the map of Yiddishland and how Yiddishland and Yiddish was kind of dispersed across Europe, and how after the Holocaust and the Second World War, these enclaves of Yiddish also appeared in different parts of the world, including Latin America, including North America, even Asia. So for us, Yiddishland at the Biennale is a constellation of national pavilions that could be associated with Yiddishland. And so the the outline of Yiddishland Pavilion, the animation goes well, and you can see how it is formed. So all these different national pavilions that can be considered part of Yiddishland, like Russia, Ukraine, Hungary, Austria, Germany, the United States, even Mexico. In our project, they all form Yiddishland Pavilion, which is, a very fluid pavilion with fluid borders, pavilion that embraces very different parts of the world, and the pavilion that is aimed to activate, the contemporary artistic Jewish discourse in the arts. Why did we think it was important, and why did we think it was a good time for a project like this to appear at the Biennale? First of all, despite what I've been saying before, about the Biennale being quite of a rigid structure as any big institution, in the recent years, we saw a lot of attempts to challenge this national division, to see how this, borders between countries and borders within the Biennale can be adjusted, can be altered, can be maybe pushed or moved. There appeared the Roma Pavilion a few years ago, which still exists and enhances voices of Roma artists who also come from very different parts of the world. There appeared, for instance, Armenian Pavilion a few years ago that won the Golden Lion, was mostly represented by diasporic artists, Armenian artists who live in the diaspora. This year, the Nordic countries, Finland, Denmark, and Norway, their pavilion was represented by Sami artists. And as you probably know, Sami community in the north, in the Nordic countries, had always been a marginalized community that had been under repression, under very strict regulation upon the kind of national governments. And since this discourse towards Sami artists started to change in the Nordic countries, they were also given a voice and they were also given a platform to present Nordic countries at the national, international artistic arena. So I think in that respect, the time for presenting Yiddishland Pavilion is very good because we see this change that are happening to the Venice Biennale. We try to also push certain borders, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we did it, and talk about the main principles of Yiddishland Pavilion, what it stands for and what kind of mission it has, and what steps it's undertaken in order to gather as many contemporary Jewish and Yiddish artists as possible. So it's a hybrid project, I must say. It's taking place both online and offline. Some of the events have been and are still taking place in Venice. We have a lot of online content, and we think also that in the post-pandemic years, when people still didn't get back fully to their former pre-pandemic traveling habits, having as much content as possible online is a way for very wide audiences to get to know more about contemporary Jewish artists and understand how, you know, how and what Yiddishland is, right? Our project is not aimed only at people who have any Jewish background or any Jewish roots, or are particularly interested in what Yiddishland is. And that was the very idea, I think, behind the project from the very beginning, to take Yiddishland and Yiddish artists and Jewish artists from I think their usual environment and the usual audiences to global audiences, to global contemporary art audiences that would also be kind of through the project to get more familiar with contemporary Jewish and Yiddish discourse. So as the Biennale is happening between April and November this year, this is also the duration of all our events that take place, as I said, both online and in dialogue with national pavilions that have, history of Yiddish-speaking Jewish migration. At the same time, Yiddishland Pavilion is very much of, I would say, imaginary project, a utopian project, a fantasy. Just like Yiddishland is a country that never really existed as a nation state, as a country. Yiddishland had always been marked by shared culture and shared language, but its borders have always been very fluid. They were expanding, they were shrinking, but they were never, set. And the map of Yiddishland was always, I think, would be different for different people. So in our project, I think this is also the idea of this utopia, of this imagination, and I think very courageous and brave imagination is very present as well. I will not go very deep into our curatorial statement, just very briefly maybe outline a few moments. The full text is available on our website, and you can maybe later take a closer look into it. So the Yiddishland Pavilion doesn't only rely on Yiddish history, because often when we think about Yiddishland, and I think maybe for the US is less so, but for maybe European countries, Yiddishland is more related to the past than to the present or to the future. But for us, since Yiddishland is this imaginary country, this utopian concept, the idea was also try to kind of think not only about an alternative pavilion, but also an alternative mode of community or society, or even a state, if you will, because we see that the nation state as a political project is failing and doesn't really meet all the demands of the society of the future. So Yiddishland could be this model of political community gathering with maybe shared vision, shared culture, shared language, and shared values. So to us, it's an artistic project, of course, but it was a very strong political message. Having said that, I must say that Yiddishland Pavilion doesn't also focus solely on Jewish-related issues. The project is very much responding to current, political agenda, to current social agenda. We kind of try to analyze the erosion of global political institutions and constellations. We try through our project to express contempt to war and occupation. We see the project as something that also kind of targets exclusion and the politics of exclusion, and kind of practices and celebrates very different forms of otherness. You know, to practice this, we also invite people and artists and scholars and curators who kind of forming this Yiddishland team from very different locations and very different backgrounds. So to show you how we started slowly to integrate into the Biennale, I show you this alternative map of Yiddishland Pavilion. So this is a very much of a dispersed project, and the idea was to stimulate some kind of both offline and online intervention into the fabric of the Biennale, into the certain pavilions that we chose as our locations for the first iteration of Yiddishland Pavilion. So if you look at the map of the locations of Yiddishland Pavilion, you see that we have very softly intervened into pavilion of Ukraine, into pavilion of Mexico, into a pavilion of Hungary and the United States and Israel and Poland and Austria and China even, which is not a very, I think, common place to think about it when you think of Yiddishland. How did this integration happen and what this integration actually means? Yiddishland Pavilion is absolutely a guerrilla project. We did not have any, and didn't plan actually to have any I would say negotiations with the administration of the Biennale. We wanted to come there as kind of this agents of soft power to end, to land very softly on these pavilions and to also test and see how we would be met, how our project would be perceived, and how the audience would respond to our intervention that took place, took very different formats. So the idea was to collaborate with various national pavilions and to kind of try to connect Yiddishland Pavilion and agenda and project of Yiddishland Pavilion with their own programming. For instance, our first opening event was a discussion at the Latvian Pavilion. I don't know if you can see the images. Yeah. So the discussion was called Map of Refugee Modernisms, and it was a conversation between Jewish artists, Latvian artists and curators, and Ukrainian artists about artists in exile in different times. So we started our conversation with the situation of the 20th century and the Jewish artists in exile, and Latvian artists in exile, and slowly touched upon contemporary situation and spoke about Ukraine and contemporary artists of Ukraine and how they respond to the war and how they also respond to artistically and emotionally to what's happening and how this is reflected in their practice. And that was a difficult discussion to I think start with, and in general was a difficult conversation to have, but we were very happy that the dialogue took place and the Ukrainian artists joined, and that we managed also to connect Jewish discourse and Latvian discourse and contemporary Ukrainian discourse and talk about contemporary political situation. as well. So that was a live event that gathered a pretty large audience and was our first event, just to kind of start to mark the pavilion and to also begin with something that would bring very different people together. I'm just thinking what would be better to talk about all the events or to continue with projects. I'll probably will continue with events because that will also give a better understanding of the projects and contributors to of the pavilion. So who are our participants and how all of this artists and how they were invited and took part of in the events. Since we're working with quite a spread geography, we were thinking of how to engage artists from different countries who are in their practice work very closely with Yiddish, with Jewish history, with contemporary Jewish discourse, and how they also shape and define this discourse. Some of the artists I think we knew from before, and Zhenya also has this very important text, I think a program text that is called New Yiddish Art, I believe. Zhenya will correct me if I'm wrong, where he also talks about what it means to be a contemporary Yiddish artist, what is contemporary Yiddish art, and how it is being kind of practiced and developed as a strain of contemporary art globally, and what are the examples of Yiddish art today. So some of the artists who are described in this article have been invited. We also invited artists who I previously worked with, and some additional research and thought of how, to invite them to be a part of the project, either with a new work or with a work that we would commission specifically for Yiddishland Pavilion. I'll speak about more works specifically, but I would like maybe to go back to events that were taking place at the opening weekend, which, like I said, were just happening quite spontaneously, I think, for the audience. They were not in the program, they were not a part of the Biennale catalog or any of the Biennale events. I think my computer is being a little bit, it's freezing a little bit. Let's see. No, it's working. Just gives me this Yandex, weird Yandex. Okay, sorry. If I do this, it will react better. Yeah. No. So one of the participants was a group of artists called Neue Jüdische Kunst. This name is an homage to a well-known artist group, Neue Slavenische Kunst. And these are two artists from Odessa, Nikolai Karbinovich and Gary Krevets, who are now both residing in Europe, I think in Belgium and the Netherlands. But they have been working together as a duo for the past, I think, maybe 6 or 8 years. And they do a lot of performative work or installation work. And for Yiddishland Pavilion, they were commissioned to produce a new work that was a performance by Hari. We unfortunately haven't uploaded the whole documentation yet on the website, but it was one-person performance when he read the text that was a little bit of a reference to the Merchant of Venice and the current political situation, and the Jewish identity and Jewish history. Was the first iteration of the performance, was a complete premiere. And it took place at the Arsenale between Latvian and Ukrainian pavilion. Also, I think was quite a strategic point for this performance. So everything was kind of, appearing quite spontaneously, and the audience was spontaneous, but very, very responsive and interested. And I think that gave us a particular boost for continuing our events. And the next one was an intervention into the German pavilion. An intervention that was language-based, Yiddish-based, but also very much of a digital piece. It was a work of augmented reality, alternative reality. This kind of fluid, floating sculpture was a collaboration between artist Ella Ponizowski-Bergelson. She is a muralist. She works with big spaces, and she creates huge murals where she combines Yiddish and German, or Yiddish and Hebrew and Arabic. And for her, changing the medium and shifting it absolutely and transferring to augmented reality, to digital reality, was a completely new thing. But it was very interesting experiment. She was very resistant in the beginning, but I think later on she really liked it, and she felt that this medium could also be a tool for her and could also expand her artistic spectrum and artistic possibilities. And Ella collaborated together with a very interesting scholar of professor of comparative literature at the University of Chicago, Anna Elena Torres, who is particularly interested in the ideas of Jewish anarchism, in female Jewish literature. So they were an interesting combination together. And the sculpture came about from the idea of critic and anarchist David Rifkin, who coined the term pseudo-territory. He actually also coined the term Yiddishland. So this pseudo-territory, the territory that sort of exists but doesn't exist in the material world, but exists as a concept, exists as a notion, and its existence also a shared idea between many people, was at the core of the sculpture, where the word pseudo-territory appears in a Proto-Canadian, Yiddish, and English. And I'll show you the documentation of the project. I can go down. Yeah. So the sculpture was sort of integrated into the German pavilion, which luckily for us stood absolutely empty this year, because the artist who was representing is representing Germany this year decided to work with the very architecture of the German pavilion and strip off its architectural layer and talk about architecture through German history and touch upon fascist history in the history of Germany, and see how it also can be manifested through architecture. So this very kind of naked building, very naked space, gave a beautiful platform for the digital sculpture, which everyone could see just using their phone, and just go on our website, or scanning the QR code from the flyer that we were giving out to people who were gathering around the pavilion. And I think that was a very beautiful way and a very effective way of how this pseudo-territory, Yiddishland, you know, imaginary pavilion could land on other pavilions and be present, and kind of visible and invisible. And I think that the project came out really, really nicely, and was an interesting digital gesture. Actually, the work is available from every place in the world. So if you can just scan the QR code from our website, you can see the work anywhere in your living room, outside the building, in your backyard. So I really encourage you to try and see how it works. So from digital, we very quickly moved on the same day to a very much of a live event, which was Yiddish Dance in front of Giardini, in front of pavilions that can also be very well attributed to Yiddishland, Polish, Romanian pavilion. And Avia Moore, artistic director of Class Canada, was also a very interesting researcher of Yiddish dance and practitioner of Yiddish dance, taught us how to do what Yiddish dance is and how to dance it. So we gathered quite a large group of people willing to study and willing to participate. We played some music, and we were inviting people to join, and people were joining in, and that was a beautiful gesture of togetherness, of being together and doing something through your body, and kind of connecting to other people through body in this very beautiful movements. I can say we were very successful from the very beginning in picking up all the movements, but later it got better. So it was a fun experience, and also I think an interesting way of landing on the Biennale, landing on the premises of the Biennale, and kind of bringing a part of Yiddishland and the territory that is connected to Yiddishland through this national pavilions, where around which Yiddish dance was taking place. Another project that is still very present at the Biennale. I'm trying to move this panel of speakers. Yeah. So I think the most intriguing project and the most present is this one? No, this one. Project by Evgeny Fix, which is an audio walk through 8 national pavilions, and which I think presents a very typical story of a Jewish artist in exile in the 20th century. Typical, but also very original. So Yone Fine's map of refugee modernism is a journey of exile of modernist artist Yone Fine, who was born in Ukraine and then had to flee to Lithuania, and then later moved to Poland and then the Soviet Union, and traveled to Japan and China until he settled in New York. He was an artist and a poet, and the audio walk talks about kind of every stop of his life in a specific national pavilion. So there's one chapter in Ukraine, then from Ukraine you should be moving to Lithuania and listen to another chapter, and then your journey continues to Poland, where you listen to another chapter, and in each of this chapter Yone Fine talks about his life and this in this specific country, but the ending is different. So this project is a combination of kind of facts and fiction. A project, an example of alternative history, of how history can be reimagined or rewritten or rethought, altered, through this walk, through this national pavilions, it also gives a different perspective on the Venice Biennale. It brings these connections between national pavilions that maybe for Biennale goers, for the audience that comes to Biennale often and is used to its settings and its surroundings and its structure, this project gives a very new take on the Biennale and this kind of national division and the connections between national pavilions and different bits of history. The project is, of course, available at the Biennale, but it's also available from our website. So if you don't plan to go to the Biennale or planning to go, but already want to know the history, the story of Unifying, you can listen it from the website. It's voiced by Shane Baker, an actor who gave voice to Unified and to this audio walk. And I think the voice fitted the character in a very interesting and intriguing way, and maybe kind of created a very special character. So I also recommend for you to listen to the walk and also think about exclusivity and inclusivity when it comes to contemporary art, not only contemporary art, but the way the artistic narratives and artistic discourse is being created. And the project definitely poses a question about national representation in the art and national identity, ethnic identity in the art, and what it means to be a Ukrainian artist, what it means to be a Lithuanian artist, what it means to be a Jewish artist in America, what does it mean to be a Jewish artist in Ukraine, what did it mean in the 20th century, what does it mean today? So I think that the project is also extremely timely and for Jewish and for Yiddish artists also comes as a very important statement and concept, and not only Jewish or Yiddish, but also artists who maybe feel as strangers at in a certain place where they find themselves, as a result of exile, as a result of migration. So I think the project is also quite critical to the order of the contemporary art world and art world in general, and the policy of creating an official and non-official narrative. So please listen to the story of Unified. So the project of Zhenya and project of Ella and Anna, this augmented reality sculpture that I talked about, are the two projects that are now available in Venice and that can be experienced in Venice fully. There are also other things that can be experienced through the website, but also can be viewed from anywhere else. So for marking Yiddishland Pavilion, we also created a series of posters that would sort of mark our presence at the Biennale and at the National Pavilion. So we did a series of posters about Yiddishland Pavilion, explaining what it is, with a QR code to respective projects that can be, of artists who either come from this country or whose project is about a specific country. And these posters were dispersed around the Biennale. Unfortunately, not all the pavilions allowed us to put up the posters. Some of them denied them and said that the posters would not fit the architecture of the pavilion. For instance, the US pavilion said no to us, and the pavilion to Israel also wasn't very welcoming to our presence. But pavilions of Poland, of Hungary, even Mexico and Japan gladly took the flyers. So our presence was marked through this kind of very colorful flyers and posters at the Biennale, and actually spotted a lot of attention. So via QR codes, you could see, you could kind of, get a link to a specific project and experience the work. Trying to get back to, sorry, did I do it? No, 1 second. Trying to go back to the website. Here. For instance, the project that was related to Hungary and kind of touch upon Hungarian context was a new work created specifically for the Yiddishland Pavilion by Zsuzsa Thorn. She's a Hungarian artist from Hungary. And in her work, she kind of speaks about some parallels and some differences in perceptions of Roma and Jewish identity in Hungary by members of third generation after the Holocaust. So she talks, the project is based on a series of interviews, also on Zsuzsa's own story and her own kind of understanding while she was a teenager, understanding and accepting of her own Jewish identity, and how she was dealing with it, and how she kind of also started learning more about, Jewish history and Roma history, and this idea of having a specific land, a specific state was also quite present in the Roma community. So she kind of compares this Jewish and Roma utopias in her work. So the video work is available on our website, will be available until the end of the Biennale, so until the end of November. So please do take a look. I think it's a very, very important work that also kind of raises the Roma question, which is still pretty urgent in Europe, and has been still largely neglected by the European governments, and has been kind of pushed aside. So Zsuzsa's work is bringing more attention to the Roma question and the position of Roma people in Europe today. That is definitely different from the position of Jewish people that is largely changed since the mid-20th century. Another project that I wanted to talk about also deals with European history, and deals with personal European history and personal kind of Jewish European history. I think in the project, there are many of the Jewish artists are working very closely with their personal story, with the story of the family, with the history of their roots, with family history, and kind of the process of engaging with this history, of embracing this history, trying to also locate it in their own current life, in their background, and understand how these connections are, how to continue these connections. And for instance, work of Hagar Sigler, an artist from Israel who has a Polish background, is a collage that has been adapted specifically for the website. And it kind of tells a story through also found photographs of Hagar's own family history. So at a certain moment, she and her family, her cousins, were notified that they had inherited an apartment building in Lodz, which kind of due to restitution process in Poland, was given to their family because it used to be owned by Hagar's great-grandparents who went through the Holocaust. I'm not sure that they survived the Holocaust. But anyways, this building was their property. And now with the new Polish laws that, descendants of Polish Jews can be eligible for inheriting this property. This is how this apartment building was inherited by Hagar. And for her, with the building also came the story of the family that she never knew, the story of her ancestors, their history. And this also kind of became new part or forgotten part of her life that she's had to newly learn about, that she had to accept, that she had to understand, and that she kind of had to find a space in her life and to kind of see how to integrate it with all the other memories or knowledge about her family. She works a lot with found photographs. She is this, person who goes to flea market and looks for old photographs, old photo albums. She's very interested in stories of people that she doesn't know. So I think in this work, she also works with the story of this building and of her family, so this kind of found or newly obtained, archive and, people that she didn't know and then suddenly become kind of a part of her family that she needs to learn more about. So this work is interactive. It's actually combined of visuals and texts. And the text is also voiced, which I think gives a very nice
February 6th,
nice touch to
1995.
the work, because the text becomes
According to our
personalized. It
agreement,
becomes,
we were together with
it's
Mark and
voiced,
Moch.
and it gets this kind
We
of
watched
new,
the
more
property
personal
together.
dimensions for this voicing.
The house looks magnificent, but you can see that it is.
And later on, you can take a closer look and see how, read the text or hear the text, and then take a closer look at the photographs. Another photo project that's also available online, but you can also, find yourself in the US Pavilion and take a look from your phone on this project. Is two photo series of US artist Sterna Goldblum. And Sterna is a queer artist who I think is in a very kind of intricate and intriguing way but is, I think, very successfully combining her Jewishness and her queerness in one very interesting, multidimensional and complex narrative. And her photographs are this kind of observations of the community that she's a part of. Absolutely beautiful images, very intimate and very gentle, I think, but also very observant and very sharp. And in the project we're presenting, in Yiddishland Pavilion, we're presenting two of her projects. One is called Shabbos, and this is what I'm showing right now. And the other one is called Fegele. If I find it, yeah, there it is. Which was also presented in the format of Torah scrolls in an exhibition space, and on the website we also tried to present it in the format of a Torah scroll. So it's a slow video in a slow motion with a lot of text and photographs, and you can take a closer look and read the text and look at all the images, and there's poetry and prose. So kind of accompanied with the photographs made by Sterna. So I think that's like an interesting journey of how LGBTQ community can also be a part of Jewish community, and how there are ways of kind of integrating tradition and sexuality and gender and kind of fluid gender norms. So I really recommend you take a closer look at Sterna's project, and also her website, which where she has more works. What else? Speaking about history and European history, and how to deal with this history, and what what emotions this history evokes, I think it's also important to take a look and talk about the work of a group work which is called Shande. This is a collaboration between 5 artists: Anne Veits, Simon Nagy, Jean Müller, Misha Gutmann, and Eduard Freudmann. And this project touches upon Austrian Jewish history. I think both Germany and Austria are still kind of, even though there was a very long process of admitting guilt, and the feeling of guilt was sort of very much conveyed through the system of education, through the system of mass culture, visual culture. Still, this I think attitude towards Jewish history and the Holocaust and all the consequences of that for Jewish people is still a very kind of painful, tragic, and very complex, phenomenon, part of the history for all the members of Austrian and German societies. Also, how this memory is continued through generations, and what memory should be kept, and what memory should be maybe erased or reconsidered or decolonized. And for instance, this very work deals with the persona of Mayor Karl Lueger, who was a huge anti-Semite, but his monument is still at the very center of Vienna. It's still very present. So kind of as a reminder of Austrian history, but also as a reminder of anti-Semitic policy in Austria. So this group of artists made an intervention into the monument. They made kind of a sign in golden letters on the monument postament, which was saying Schande, shame in German, and they were guarding this sign from the police for, I think, maybe a week or so, because they wanted to be present in the public space. They wanted to instigate a discussion about certain memories and certain legacies that and certain symbols and histories that the monument still symbolizes and very kind of loudly articulates in the public space. And Eduard Freudmann, Jewish Austrian artist, he is very much his research and his works in general are very much focusing on monuments, and monuments as symbol of memory, symbol of history, symbols of certain things that must be remembered. So in a way, this intervention into the monument, I think, very much kind of correlates with the Black Lives Matter movements and the whole series of overthrown monuments, of kind of people who were very much a part a very active part of American racist history. So what do we do with monuments? What do we do with this heritage? What do we do with the history? Do we completely erase memories that we don't want to keep, or we put them into a different framework? I think this is what this work is also trying to maybe ask, not to answer these questions, but to pose them and also kind of ask the audience about it. There was also kind of this work later turned into an installation. We were thinking about the possibility actually to bring the sculpture, this Shan sculpture to Venice, and we spoke with the Austrian Pavilion about potential collaboration. Unfortunately, we didn't get any response from them. So that was also, I think, an interesting aspect of Yiddishland Pavilion, because for us, definitely the project is very much of an experiment, also when it comes to collaborations with pavilions and collaborations with pavilions that have a very complex and ambivalent Jewish history. So the fact that, Austrian Pavilion never replied, German Pavilion never replied, the intervention that I was talking about was done completely guerrilla. Even though we had a presentation of this argumented reality on the steps of the German Pavilion, the German curator, the German artists were not aware of our actions, and they never responded to us. So I think this silence and this kind of inability to have this dialogue with them was also something that we'll have to overcome in the future, because we definitely want to continue the project and think of potential ways of its development. So I think I touched upon maybe main things among projects. Maybe a couple of words about this online performance of Jenny Remain. So throughout the entire duration of the Biennale, we also having some things are not working as properly as they should, I think. Okay. We also have a very intensive online program, which is a series of online discussions, online performances, presentation of new artworks and talks. Artists, scholars, curators. We're also planning to invite some of the artists and curators of a few national pavilions. And Jenny Remain conducted the performance. We're working now on its documentation, and she kind of wanted to, through the performance, she wanted to touch upon the theme of Jewish-Canadian relationship to land and colonialism, and also the position of Ashkenazi Jews in Canada and their history in Canada. This online performance, I think, was also an interesting experience, because over this, pandemic times, we're so used to having events through the screen that the online performance, when Jenny would, come to appear in different costumes with different background and kind of juggling between various videos and various outfits, was a very interesting example of how an online performance can be organized and hosted, and can be an interesting event to be a part of, even though it's happening online. Okay, I think I'll wrap up here, and if you have any questions, or maybe Zhenya can add something or talk about something that I have missed. Maybe I didn't say something important.
Thank you so much, Masha. I'll be happy to um, uh, answer any questions or add anything.
Maybe I will use this very quick pause, maybe while people are thinking of some potential questions or remarks, to introduce our event tomorrow. Like I was saying, it's about Jewish architecture and its legacy, and then politics and sort of the architectural imprint left by Jewish and Yiddish culture through architecture at the territory of Eastern Europe and beyond. And we will have three brilliant speakers tomorrow. Cecile Kuznets from Bard College. She is, I think, head of the Jewish department at Bard. Natalia Romik, a brilliant architect and artist and performer. And she will actually talk about shtetls and the concept of shtetls and history of shtetls and legacy of shtetls in contemporary Poland. And I think it will be a very interesting presentation. And Hagar Siegler, who I mentioned earlier today, will speak more about the project, about this inherited apartment building in Lodz, and how the project, her photography project, came about, and how her kind of personal memories are combined with, you know, public memory and official historical discourse. So it's going to start at 2 p.m. New York time tomorrow. Please join, please register. I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion of, you know, Yiddishland in architectural perspective, in how this architecture is remembered, how it's repurposed, how it's reused, and what are the possible ways, also artistic and research ways of you know, practicing its remembrance and understanding Yiddishland through architecture.
I have a question. Maria, first, I want to thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. It was extremely interesting, and I will attend tomorrow events because it's especially relates to me and my interest in art and history and theory of architecture. But also I want to ask you, what is the future? What projects will be included? Do you look for new artists to be included in the future pavilion project? Do you see, do you have any arrangements for the next Biennale? Can you, you know, a little bit about this?
Yeah, we have plans. We just started, and we're both very excited about the project and how it has been developing. And we've had good responses from our audience, and also the fact how the project landed at the Biennale. You know, even though we maybe didn't manage to get all the connections with the national pavilions, we saw that the audience who were part of our projects, or who saw our projects and artistic works, were very interested and moved by them. So we would definitely be happy to have Yiddishland Pavilion 2024. We're thinking of potential formats, and we want to be more present at the Biennale. This year we're appearing a lot in the digital, in this kind of, you know, augmented reality, additional reality format, and also, you know, in this kind of fluid way. So I think we would like to have more of a material representation. Maybe not a new pavilion will be built by 2024. And also this is not that we're aiming at, because we would prefer to keep this kind of dispersed format, and the format where we collaborate with national pavilions and find maybe some new forms of collaboration. But we would definitely be happy to continue. There are lots of artists that we would like to work with. Luckily, Yiddishland is big, and there are many artists and many potential participants. And we're very interested in having Yiddishland Pavilion as a regular part of the Biennale. Jenny, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The hope is that the Yiddishland Pavilion will be a constant thing, that it's going to happen every 2 years, every other year, and but formats would probably change over time. And as Maria said, we really don't want to lose that collaboration, forms of collaboration with national pavilions, because that's the most exciting part, I think, curatorially about this project, is that we're not building, its own thing for the Yiddishland Pavilion and trying to separate ourselves from other nations, imaginary or real, but we want to engage with other communities and other nations, other countries, other points on the map. So we want to continue with that. But also I want to mention that I think what Yiddishland could become, it could really become a Yiddishland Pavilion, could become a project, really an alternative project for Eastern and Central Europe and beyond. An alternative pavilion, because we don't even think about Yiddishland Pavilion as a pavilion of only Jewish artists or Yiddish artists, right? It's a pavilion for all the artists of the Yiddishland, which includes non-Jewish artists, right? So it's a pavilion of neighbors in Eastern Central Europe and beyond. So we'll see where this idea will take us.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Eastern European countries, they have their own national pavilions. So how they will share place with Yiddish. Even the Yiddish artist, you think it's, I want to put in this way. So we all understand Yiddish as heritage, but what it means to be Yiddish artists, contemporary Yiddish artists, can you tell me? What do you think about this?
Well, there must be a connection, of course, to the heritage, right? To Yiddish language and Yiddish history, Yiddish culture. But Yiddish culture is here. It exists, and it's changed, of course, a lot from how it was before the war. But it exists, and it cannot help but keep on going, right? And we are working with Maria a bit with the concept of post-vernacular Yiddish culture, and this idea, at least I read this concept in works by Jeffrey Chandler. So this idea of post-vernacular Yiddish culture is, I think, what we are focusing on, but among our artists, I think only one artist, only Sterne Goldblum, is a native Yiddish speaker. For the rest of the artists, either second read or speak Yiddish as a second language, or not at all. So but there is an attachment, of course, to history, to Yiddish culture as it was, but also as it could be, as it is now. So there is some nostalgia, but nostalgia is not defining the project, right? And Sterne Goldblum is our only native speaker among our artists, but also the youngest artist, I think. I can't as far as Sterne's age. So So I guess we'll see how the project unfolds.
Yeah. And Stern is not nostalgic, I think, at all. She's very much incorporated in the presence, and that her projects are very celebratory to contemporary Yiddish culture and what Yiddish culture is today, and how it can be also very diverse and also inclusive for things that could not be a part of it a few decades ago. And that, I think, also shows how Yiddish culture is developing today, how it has kind of, gained this new layers and meanings through newer generations, through younger generations, and I think also the first events of our online program with Rochel Kafrisen and with Jenny Romain and her younger colleagues also showed us what is American Yiddishland, and how American Yiddishland is, I think, very inclusive and very diverse and very, very vivid and very much alive. And through our pavilion, we're kind of also trying to connect these different parts of Yiddishland. What is Yiddishland Poland today? What is Yiddishland Hungary today? What is Yiddishland Lithuania today? And these connections, I think, bring lots of new ideas and new collaborations as well. So, we want to, I think, instigate more collaborations. We had a beautiful project by Anna Jelena Torres and Ella Poziniozowski-Bergenson, two people who never met each other. One is based in Berlin, the other one is based in the US, but they worked together and made a beautiful project together. So, and this kind of, Yiddishland connects different people through our project, which I think is already kind of gives a very good example of how Yiddishland exists today and how it continues living, and how it's not so much a lot about the past, but also very much about the future. Regina, you have to turn on your sound, I'm afraid. Yeah.
I'm sorry. What, from your point of view, there are any contradictions between Yiddish culture today, I'm talking about contemporary, and Israeli culture, which based now on Hebrew?
I think so. And we spoke a lot about it, I think, with artists from Israel, and, especially with this artistic duo Salamanca. They are artistic duo, theater duo, who are this kind of enthusiast of Yiddish theater in Israel. And of course, as this Israeli duo working in Yiddish, in contemporary Israel, where Yiddish is still considered the language of the very religious people, the Hasidic community, there is still certain tension going on. And but I think it's also important for us to mention that we, in Yiddishland Pavilion in general, is highlights Jewish discourse that's happening outside of Israel, and is kind of not available, but discourse of the Jews who don't always associate themselves with the status of Israel. And I think Israel is just a part of Yiddishland, but not dominating Yiddishland. And especially when we think about it in the political terms. So I think it's important to make these distinctions, and to make this, to also understand that for years, Yiddish was banned in Israel, and especially in the beginning when the state was just formed, Yiddish was this kind of language of the weak Jews, the Jews that just came from Europe, and Yiddish was banned in public spaces. So it also kind of, Yiddish had a very complex history in Israel, unfortunately. But I'm glad that there are artistic communities and artistic initiatives aimed at revival of and kind of preserving and familiarizing more audiences of people with Yiddish that goes beyond only religious or academic fields. Sound again.
Regina,
Yes,
Okay.
okay, because okay, so Maria and Zhenya, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I'm very happy that you know, Yiddishland was born and you acquainted us all with this wonderful project. And we would love to, you know, to see more of what you are doing and what you will do in the future. So very good luck to you, and thanks again. And thanks to all our participants. I hope it was informative and interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this beautiful evening. For me, it's
Thank you very
already
much.
very late. Thank you for the invite, and best of luck to your series, the Aspera series, and I'll be joining your events in the future as audience.
Okay, thank you. Okay, great. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.